crisis, I think this is like a typical example which demonstrates the value of risk management. If you can reduce the loss, and that's a big contribution. I think you have to be proactive in the whole business development. And the third is you have to develop a positive attitude toward risk management. So I'm basically communicating with my business division head on a very often basis. I'm talking with them about the business opportunity, try to understand their challenge and revenue challenge, and I try to be helpful. I think this way you try to participate at an early stage. This is very important. I think you are in the process. It's not something you just sit in your office waiting to see the result, and then you try to make a judgment. And I think next one is you have to establish a team which has credential to effectively communicate with risk management. I understand a lot of company, they put junior people, they put people without experience in risk management position, especially in the last 5 or 10 years in Wall Street. There's a big difference with respect to compensation between front office people and the risk management. So here, we do hire a lot of experienced people in the risk function. And for example, our head of market risk spent quite a number of years at the investment bank in the U.S. And we also hire a lot of senior people now to do competitive development, and to make sure we can grasp the high tech in the financial industry. That's how I call it. And that's essentially a few things we try to do to empower risk management at CICC.
Okay, Jason. Short answer to your question is with a lot of difficulty. I suppose we need to look for champions, people who with a light mind. If you look at the Singapore environment, it tends to be very what I call patriarchal, right? The government tends to look after the country fairly well, and you tend to sit back and relax in a safe cocoon. I think we need to break out of that and say, look, the new world has changed, and the initiative needs to come from initially the regulators to create that open dialogue and say, look, guys, this is what we are looking at. Where could you guys meet minimum requirements? And the institutions then need to be able to sit down with the regulators and say, hey, without being confrontational, and say, look, these are my limitations. What can you live with? And that's a collaborative work, which I believe Mark talked about earlier. We need to collaborate as an industry. Institutions need to understand that, hey, fine and good that the regulators look after stability, financial stability, but I do have a place in that financial system. And if I fail, I'm going to create instability within that system. And this is what I term as being a socially responsible organization. Whether you're a bank or you're a chemical industry company, it doesn't make a difference. But then you need a lot of education. The term that we used to use in the MAS was evangelism. We need to constantly talk to the banks. The banks need to be able to feel comfortable enough to go to the regulators and say, hey guys, I have this issue, I have this challenge. How can you help me? And I think in creating a more open industry, regulatory, supervisory environment, that's going to help a lot. But I think what is very important is that we need champions in the industry, not just within Singapore itself, not within countries itself. I look at UOB, we operate in, 18 countries. And, you know, I used to say to my colleagues at the DBS and OCBC, I say, you guys are lucky. Because I have a lot more regulatory issues to deal with. And I can't just focus on what the MAS requirements are. I got to take into account all the other regulatory requirements. And the regulatory environment is going to change. You're talking a more consolidated regulatory approach. Regulators are talking a lot more to each other, the regulatory supervisory colleges. I think banks should do likewise. Get banks more involved in that. Put on the table what are the key issues that the regulators need to be addressed, and how banks can meet those challenges. And one of the things that I feel fairly strongly about was the incentives, for creating incentives for banks to improve on the risk management practices. I mean, I don't have an answer to that, but I think these are things that we can think about. And I think that the MES has moved in the right directions in providing, say, subsidies for training, for specific training. I think that's some of the things that we can do.
Thank you. I actually have one final quick question for each of you in turn. If we can take literally a 1-minute answer for each question. For you, David, you spent a long time in North America, in Canada, New York. About a year ago, you came back to China, which has changed incredibly. On the culture side, we've talked about the challenges everywhere in the world of creating a robust and strong risk culture. I know you haven't been back very long, but what's your sense? What's your sense of that challenge in China? How China's changing so much. Are there any particular attributes, or just your perspectives, your quick sort of sense of things, having been back just a little while? How is China addressing that challenge? How are the Chinese banks going with that?
I look at the problem from two angles. One angle is we can't emphasize too much the difference between China and abroad. Just from a human being perspective, people need to work, people need to find a place to live, and it's the same. I think it's the same principle you can apply to the financial industry. And so we learn from the success. I think many years ago I met Marian Schultz and for dinner. Marian said, since I left long-term capital and blamed for the collapse, and spent a lot of time about leadership. So my question to him, I said, what's your proposal now? So one idea, he said, learn from success. So we try to learn from the success and the failure. Both